Peace, world, and welcome to a special conversation for the Sportster. My name is Adam Barnard. Thank you so much for joining me again today. My guest is former Bellator heavyweight champion and the man who portrays Mark Coleman in the upcoming film The Smashing Machine, Ryan Bader. Sir, thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely, all mine.
So, you play Mark Coleman, like we mentioned, in The Smashing Machine, and this is your first acting role. What was that experience like for you taking that first step into Hollywood?
Yeah, it came about really from a text message from Benny Safdie, and then he told me about what he was doing, and I was aware of the documentary back in the day, and obviously that's my lineage in this sport, right? Amateur
Hmm.
wrestler going into the deep end and MMA, and I did a audition on Zoom with him, and then didn't hear anything for like 3 weeks, and then I got a text like, "Hey, we'll see you in Vancouver in about 3 weeks." And so it happened very, very fast, and I was thrown into the deep end right away. I'm in there on set and scenes with Emily Blunt and DJ The Rock, and so pretty surreal, but prepared, felt good, went in there and just did my thing.
What was it about Mark Coleman's story, or maybe even Mark Kerr's story, that drew you to the role?
Yeah, I mean both of their stories, right? It's like I said, they're pioneers, coming from that high level amateur wrestling and then going into mixed martial arts. And, they were thrown kind of in the deep end kind of right away for their, wrestling accolades and what they could do with just wrestling alone and learning along the way, and both of our paths are kind of, all three of our paths are kind of the same deal. And so when I heard about this story, I've seen the documentary back in the day. I got a refresher on it, watched it again, and it was, if I was ever to be in a movie, like this is the one, right?
Yeah.
And obviously bring that authenticity with the mixed martial arts background and the wrestling, and ended up talking to Coleman and Kerr before it happened, and so just an honor to be a part of that and portray, their story.
Now, this was also not just your first role, but this was also Dwayne Johnson's first dramatic performance. What
Yep.
was it like for you watching him immerse himself into the life and really the persona of Mark Kerr?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that helped, kind of calm nerves and everything for me going on set. And I'm looking at Mark Kerr. I'm not looking at the man known as The Rock, right? He has his prosthetics. He, 4 hours of, makeup, prosthetics, hair, all that kind of stuff. And that made it a little easier. And I got to see him in the scenes we were in, and he did a fantastic job. But I never got to see the whole thing, you know. And so when we were in the theater and I got to watch it, he did an unbelievable job. Just everything from his scenes with Emily to being in the locker room and the look in his face and his eyes. It felt real. It felt like you were in that moment, like about to walk out for a fight. And so, yeah, he killed it.
One of the things I noticed during the film as well was that Benny Safdie's commitment to making the action look as real and as authentic as possible. What was that like working with Benny through those action scenes, and how authentic do you think that the action looked in the film?
Yeah, if you put the fights side by side, obviously in the movie, it's going to be a little cut up, the fights, and but body position, what they did in real life, back in those real fights, those same moves and punches thrown are what happened in what we portrayed in the movie. I got there early, and I obviously had to learn how to punch people by not punching them, and it's a whole
I can
art
imagine that
form.
was probably a little bit
Yeah,
difficult, like not so natural, right? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, all the stunt guys are like, "Hey, MMA fighters are really good or horrible at this because some let their ego get in the way and be like, hey, that's not how we do it."
Right.
But obviously, you can't be out there punching people, right? On the flip note, a couple of my opponents in the movie, they were fighters in real life or have fought in the past, and we kind of made a little side pact. We're like, hey, is it cool if I give you some a little bit on the ground, like, kind of real, and we everybody was cool with that, and we actually, some of those punches are real. I hit one of them and his ear blew up, little cauliflower ear. I was like, sorry, buddy, but it was fun, and it's a lot of work, and shooting those fight scenes where it could be 4 or 5 hours long, and you cool off, get makeup, tattoo cover, retouch, get back in there, and we are going hard. And so it was like 4 hours of that. Sometimes I walked out of those fights more sore than an actual real fight.
There's a scene, one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie is when you go in and visit Mark in the hospital after he overdoses. And it's hit
Mm-hmm.
me in this really deep emotional area personally. I remember just sitting in the theater and being in tears watching this because of my own experiences in my life.
Yep.
Was there a part of yourself that you tapped into for that scene that maybe you hadn't touched before? And did that scene specifically teach you anything about yourself?
Yeah, that scene was the one that I auditioned for, and one that Safdie was like, "Hey, this is one of the harder scenes in the movie," and so I was thinking about that from the moment I got that right,
Mhm.
and I can put myself in that relationship of you have another a training partner, a friend that you bleed with daily, and but there's still some competition, who's trying to be the best, and we could fight, so it's a kind of a weird different dynamic a little bit, but at the end of the day, they're brothers, they're friends, and walking in there, yeah, I just felt like I was in the moment and trying to get a buddy, that we bleed together every day, and
Mhm.
that's a different relationship you get with somebody when you go through hard things with somebody, and so I just felt like I was in that moment, and my buddy's there, and he needs the help, and he needs to get back on his feet, because he has so much to live for, and purpose and whatnot. And yeah, I kind of felt that. I walked into that every other scene. I'm like, walked in, walked out. I was like, I don't know. That one I felt good about. I don't know. I was just in a good headspace going in there.
When you reflect on Mark Coleman's career, specifically in the era that you portrayed here, do you reflect on your own legacy in, mixed martial arts and the UFC and Bellator? Do you reflect on that a little bit differently?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm not one to like look back too much, but with it going back and watching all the the Pride tapes and really diving in, to make it authentic as possible with Coleman's fights and whatnot. I'm like, man, it'd be so fun to fight in Pride back in the day, and that's actually how I'm fighting in New Year's Eve in Rising, and we got out of that movie, and I believe that was the last heavyweight Grand Prix they ever did with Coleman winning it. So I got
Hmm.
to do that and portray that in the movie, and then they did the heavyweight tournament. I'm fighting the winner in New Year's Eve, and
Yeah.
so that kind of came about because of the Smashing Machine, and to go through and like really look at Coleman's career, the ups and downs, and that's happened to me. You kind of see your career kind of on that same path, right? You're going your highest level, and then you have a little dip, and we all do, right? And then
Yeah.
you come out of it and you accomplish something, and so yeah, it was cool, diving into that.
Now, The Smashing Machine hits theaters on October 3rd. Go out of your way to check this out. This is an incredible film. Ryan Bader, I can't thank you enough for your time. Once again, you did an incredible job in the film,
Thank you.
and I want to thank you for this conversation.
I appreciate it, buddy. Thank you.